StarCraft 2 is known as one of the hardest games to play in the world, but most people think StarCraft Brood War is even harder. The effect of this is that first of all, good Brood War players are seen as absolute elite gamers by default. The negative secondary effect, however, is that everyone is scared to try it. I decided to commit myself to playing 100 games of Terran in StarCraft Brood War. In this video I will show you my journey to becoming the highest rank I possibly can in a limited time, how I learn and improve at a new RTS game, as well as finding an answer to the question: is StarCraft Brood War really as hard as everyone thinks? For the first 10 games I decided to not watch any videos or streams on how to play, and just kind of figure out the game myself. Watching guides is very useful, but sometimes it can feel like you end up shaping yourself exactly like the pro meta, without figuring out what units and styles you even like to play with first. This can be counterproductive at the start and make the game feel less interesting. I played a little bit of Brood War already as a kid, so I kind of knew how the units and tech paths worked, and I thought that I at least should be able to piece a decent build together. For Terran vs Protoss I decided to play a fast tank push into mech, which I was pretty sure would be the only viable style in the matchup. For Terran vs Zerg I tried to do a simple marine push and then get into marine tank with science vessels against lurkers. And in Terran vs Terran, well, I honestly didn't really have a strategy. I just thought since mirror matchups are weird and chaotic, I could probably just win a couple games by accident and copy a better build for my opponents later. Now I know a bit more, I can definitely say that Terran vs Terran builds are pretty crazy. Builds aside, I thought these first 10 games would be the perfect time to figure out what exactly is so difficult about Brood War and what I should work on the most. Well, let me tell you, there are many things very difficult about Brood War. But it wasn't really what I expected. I initially thought that simply the macro would be the hard part, with there being no multiple building selection. Especially in longer games where your buildings are going to spread all over the place. In reality, the macro itself was not really that difficult. The early game in Brood War has a bit of a slower start than in StarCraft 2, so setting up your build to go into the mid game is usually pretty calm. The real difficulty for me lied in two things. Most importantly, large army unit control is incredibly hard. Well, in StarCraft 2 the unit selection is basically unlimited. In Brood War you can only select 12 units at a time. You can imagine that when you have to control 80 units later in the game, yeah, it's pretty hard. At this point I also didn't find a way yet to customize my hotkeys, as the game itself does not allow you to customize control groups and camera hotkeys. Combine that with my StarCraft 2 muscle memory where I have fully customized hotkeys, and that left me with 2 control groups for my army and 1 camera hotkey. This was an incredible challenge that I wasn't sure I was going to overcome. The second part of the difficulty was all the little things that you automatically assume are similar to StarCraft 2, but in reality totally aren't. For example, you can't build buildings when you select multiple SCVs. So if you try to select 3 SCVs to quickly build 3 additional barracks, it doesn't work. You have to do it all one by one. If you select multiple spellcasters, let's say 5 High Templars, and you press Storm, they will all storm at once and you waste an incredible amount of energy. There are a bunch of smaller things too that you wouldn't think of but can really add up when you're in the middle of an intense game. If you build a building in Brood War, the money doesn't disappear until the building actually starts. So if you're used to StarCraft 2 and you assume the money is gone, start something else, you will later find out that your building never started. SCVs also block other workers from building stuff sometimes, making it pretty hard to build buildings next to each other. Which is exactly what you want to do to produce units, because remember, you cannot select multiple buildings at the same time. I also found the cheese builds incredibly hard to defend in this game. Zealots and Zerglings are so much stronger than I expected. Defending 1 Zealot with Terran the first time felt like I needed 7000 APM, and dealing with 4 Zerglings felt like I needed 8 Marines instead of like 2. Overall, for the first 10 games my win rate was pretty good. At this point I was about 1600 MMR on the border of C and D rank, which is quite strong for a beginner since the starting MMR is 1500, and usually the players around that rating are experienced already. I won against some Protosses and Zergs with the builds that I mentioned before. I did indeed beat some Terrans by accident, including a very chaotic proxy game against the highest ranked player I faced yet. In the end, I did meet a good Protoss and Zerg that destroyed me, so I thought it was a good time to now study and learn some actual builds. I wasn't necessarily looking for the most up-to-date meta builds yet, but more for builds that I felt fit my playstyle and would be doable to execute for me at my current skill level. I ended up copying two relatively old builds from Flash, the best Brood War player of all time. A Terran vs Protoss build from 5 years ago and a Terran vs Zerg build from 3 years ago. I didn't study a build yet for the TVT matchup because I still felt like I could keep cruising for a little bit longer by just playing chaotic early games and using my speed. The TVP build I copied was very similar to the plan I already had, but obviously a lot better and cleaner. It was a 10-10-10 build, meaning it has a different build order even for the first 3 structures than the standard. This allows you to hit a nice timing push early on, which was also easy to memorize for me. For TVZ, I copied another mech build that was basically opening up with 3 vultures for harassment. This is a recipe that I really like for any RTS I play, to copy a build that has a lot of harassment early on so you can skill check your opponent. This way you get scouting by default because you're attacking, and if you're playing players that are, for example, really good in macro games but bad at early game micro, or just generally play really greedy, you can punish them. After the 3 vultures, you would go into Goliaths to defend Mutas, hit an initial timing attack with a bunch of Goliaths with +1 armor, followed by another timing attack with mass Goliaths and 2 siege tanks to break lurkers and sunkens. Sounds simple enough. A good tip I can give to you guys for learning to macro in RTS games is to not necessarily cheese, but to hit mid-game timing attacks. These kind of builds force you to defend cheeses, micro units to victory, but there's still a bit of a macro element to it. You have to macro decently well to hit strong enough and to keep the production going while you're fighting. And in some games you will even have to transition out of it into a later game, training your skills there. Something very important for me while learning these builds is that I didn't just learn the strict build themselves, but also just the general flow of the game. I needed to know when Terran typically attacks, when my strong moments are, and my weak moments. And it's also nice to learn what a good game is supposed to look like, so when you analyze a replay, you can actually tell if you were ahead or behind at any point. I decided to practice my new builds and my new knowledge for the next 25 games. I know it sounds like a very big part of my 100 total games, but in the end you just need a lot of practice. No matter how good you think you are, you just need to play a lot of games. Theory alone doesn't cut it. For the next 10 games I lost a decent amount, but I did feel a lot stronger already. My game started looking a lot more like how Brood War is actually supposed to be played. My builds versus both Zerg and Protoss really seemed to work, and expectedly I was mostly just losing to major skill issue on my part. I could tell that for the first time in this challenge I was actually starting to react to what I'm scouting, recognize that certain builds were a bit off and try to adapt on the fly. This helped me defeat a couple of the more cheesy players, which is what I was struggling with the most before. My biggest struggle was 100% still the big army control. In one game where I played a strong Protoss, I managed to macro up to a really big army pretty quick. Theoretically, I was supposed to be in a good spot. But I was really not capable yet of controlling such a big army, and it quickly ended in an absolute disaster. I was still doing pretty well against the Terrans, and my MMR went all the way up to almost 1700. Solidifying my position nicely in the middle of C rank. After this, I got the full taste of real Brood War experience. I felt like I was starting to go up and up, but then I got smacked straight down to earth. I lost 5 games in a row due to underestimating the limitations of the game. One game I tried to get my SCV to repair a bunker, and it took so long that even though I pulled it pretty early, it still didn't reach it in time. I would get destroyed by probe harass because I simply didn't expect how hard it was going to be to defend a simple probe. I would struggle against zealot rushes because once again I underestimated how hard it would be to micro against a zealot with a couple SCVs and marines. It sounded easy enough, but it really wasn't. In another game I failed to micro my army properly because I expected my vulture to be in the army hotkey. But the army hotkeys are limited to 12 units and I didn't realize I had too many. Moments, days, and sometimes even weeks like this exist when things don't go your way. It's a good reminder that when those moments come that it's fine to take a break and come back stronger after having rested up. So that's exactly what I did. A big tip I can share that helped me a lot in my Brood War journey is to fully accept certain things like bad pathfinding as part of the game. If you know in advance unit pathing is going to be rough attacking up a ramp, Don't attack up there unless you know you can actually take the position easily. If you go up there expecting your units to magically pathfind perfectly, you're just gonna be upset. After this little break, I played my 5 remaining games of the 25 I set out to play with my newly learned builds. With my refreshed mindset, I was able to deal better with the things that are difficult about the game and approach it with a learning mindset instead. I was simply playing better and executing well, despite nothing really having changed besides me simply taking some rest. Despite my mindset being better, there were still so many things that shocked me, and I really had to get used to. In this one game, I got rushed by lurkers, so I built a turret on the high ground and it didn't detect it, even though it looked like it was literally right there. I was struggling with Vulture Micro, and I figured this was probably one of those things that I needed a trick for or specific movement pattern that I just hadn't quite learned yet. I was still learning a lot of things simply by playing games and realizing random things about the game. I was learning to move my SCVs better by clicking them through minerals, assuring my buildings were placed more on time. My army hotkey separations were coming more naturally to me, improving my Vulture Tank Micro as well as bigger army control in general. I started adapting to the game a little more instead of just blindly executing builds. In this game I noticed my opponent was being greedy, so instead of just trying to out-execute him, I tried to go for a sneaky bunker rush, because why not? And it worked extremely well. Once I even did the wrong build because I remembered the wrong race from the loading screen, but still managed to adapt it into a win, which felt fantastic. For the next 10 games I decided to stream live on Twitch to try and get some more eyes on my gameplay and to fish for some random tips here and there. Initially I was mostly just getting nostalgia enjoyers instead of tips, but slowly but surely they started pouring in. I got a lot of small tips that really started adding up later on. I learned how many factories with and without add-ons you can sustain per base, which is very useful to not have to do rocket science in the middle of the game to figure out what you can afford. I learned the trick to microing vultures, which is by using patrol. I learned what common scout timings are, how to change builds, and how to better place my buildings to defend rushes, as well as getting good ideas for my hotkey setup, which I ended up fixing entirely after the stream. As expected, being a bit more distracted by the stream, I didn't gain a solid amount of points, but after taking a little bit of a break, I played 5 additional games with the new tips and I won every single one of them. My gameplay was feeling more smooth than ever, my micro on the TVP pushes in particular stole the show, and I broke my rating record by achieving 1700 points. At this point we had played 50 games, reaching the halfway point of the challenge, and we were still climbing quite quickly. Perhaps even more important, I felt like there was still so much more to improve on, meaning that if we take the right approach, we would not get stuck anytime soon. For the second half of this challenge, it was time to get serious. My basics got much better and I felt confident that I could take on higher level strategies. I decided to study Terran games from the recent ASL, which is the highest level tournament in the world, live in Korea. The best Terran player in the league seemed to be Light, so I took a look at one full series for both TVZ and TVP. One against Jaedong, who is the most legendary Zerg of all time, and one versus Best. The builds were quite different from what I had been playing so far, so it was definitely out of my comfort zone, but that's usually where you improve the most. For TVZ, I started playing Bio, which I found really scary as it seemed incredibly difficult to me before. A lot of the small details in particular were very interesting to me. Walling off at the front very early on even though it seemed risky. Building turrets in a certain way to deter Mutalisks in combination with positioning your army forward, threatening counterattacks. For TVP the build wasn't too different but definitely scary. It was a more standard build with a less committed push. The committed pushes with good micro was how I had been winning most of my games up until this point. So that wasn't necessarily something I wanted to stop doing. I also considered standard macro TVP to be the hardest kind of games I would have to play. So I wasn't really looking forward to it, but I stayed strong. And I was rewarded. I won the first 5 games I played after this studying session. On one hand, the games were quite weird, so maybe I just got lucky. On the other hand, I didn't feel like I was playing too well myself. So the fact I still won all the games despite that means that my framework was really getting quite solid. The next day I played 10 more games with the same strategies. I noticed that for the first time in this challenge, I was actually getting more comfortable playing Brood War, which was a really great feeling. Both my TVZ and my TVP felt good with the new strategies. I started getting very competitive with the players that were higher MMR than me, meaning that I was leaving the zone of simply beating players with good timing attacks and entering the zone where I was actually playing the real game and could start beating real strong players too. I ended up reaching B rank for the first time, which felt incredible. Way faster than I expected. In fact, I wasn't even sure if I was gonna reach it by the end of this challenge at all. But today wasn't all glory. I lost every single TVT. It was the only matchup I didn't study and it was starting to catch up to me. The worst part was that it really didn't seem like an interesting matchup to me in these games. It felt like we were just gambling in the early game and then it was a lot of camping and staying passive with a lot of siege tanks. I also struggled a good amount with the cheesy Zergs. One Zerg did a lurker drop and it felt like it hit when I had 5 Marines. My brain could not comprehend how I could defeat it at the time. Against Protoss players this was reversed. I was destroying the cheesy ones and struggling more with the macro games. The mine and tank micro in the long games in particular was devastatingly difficult, where it felt like I needed 15 army hotkeys and 4 sets of hands to be able to deal with it all. It was a good moment to reflect on the success we had already achieved at this point. We had a lot of different difficulties, but despite that, we reached our new record rank and points, and in the end, these solvable struggles only mean that we can improve so much more. Since I was improving rapidly, both in skill and in MMR, I continued on the same path. I had a couple of horrible losses, but it didn't faze me too much and I got a good amount of wins after. And most importantly, I learned a lot on this day. I was still losing my TVT games, but after about 70 total games, I finally felt like I was getting my build down and could now compete with the strong Terrans. Similarly in TVZ, I was losing to the high level Zergs, but I felt like I was getting really close. I felt like I just needed to have slightly sharper timings as well as better turret placement to stop getting ravaged by mutas. Previously, Zergs that were above my MMR would feel impossible to beat, so this was a very strong sign of general improvement. At this point I realized that I had been wrong about Brood War games. Beforehand I really thought that most games were going to end up being a pure mechanical brawl, a struggle against the game. Instead, a lot of games actually ended pretty early at the hands of strategy, good micro and clean execution. This is something that I really liked and started catering my builds towards more. In StarCraft 2, my favorite builds, like I mentioned before, have a lot of skill checking, which means that you use strategies that have a lot of pressure, and if your opponent is not good enough to deal with it, they will simply die or get far behind. If your opponent is good enough to defend it, you won't find yourself in an unplayable spot. The pressure isn't committed enough for this. I decided to focus purely on making that same strategy work on Brood War, and it worked wonderfully. I felt super solid against every lower rated player as they simply wouldn't be able to handle my strong pressure builds with good micro. Sometimes they would defend, but find that they struggled to macro behind it where I didn't have too much trouble with that. The same aggression allowed me to compete with higher rated players, who may have had better strategy and late game plans than me, but under the pressure they ended up being forced to play my game instead. The higher I climbed, the more I learned from the higher rated players. For example, strong Protoss players would hold my pushes by using high grounds in the middle of the map to slow my attack down. In StarCraft 2, high ground doesn't make your units stronger, but in Brood War units from the low ground can miss, so it is a big advantage for them. This helped me plan out my attacking paths a little better, either by trying to be sneaky or just by avoiding high grounds where their army could be staked out. Perhaps my biggest mistake in these first 75 games was that I noticed I kept misjudging games by feeling. I would study the replays after my losses and notice that games would be even, whereas in the game I felt like I was completely dead. It's a problem I've had more frequently in different games, where I felt that when going up against a strong player, I would need everything to go well for me, and if they didn't, I would feel discouraged and like I couldn't come back. In Brood War it seemed like I had more potential to come back and that I was better than I thought. So I decided to ignore those feelings and purely focus on executing my timing attacks and believing that I can win no matter what the early game situation was from there on out. In the next couple games I did face a little bit of a reality check. reminding me that I'm still new to the game and I still have a ton of weaknesses. I would lose frequently to strategies that I scouted, either because I just refused to adapt and wanted to stick to my strategy, or because I simply didn't know what to change. I even ended up losing to a 1200 rated Zerg player, which most people would probably find very frustrating, but at the time I honestly found it quite hilarious. Sometimes you need a reminder like this. If you feel like you're on top of the world, it's easy to turn off your learning mindset. Getting a crushing defeat like this can straighten you out and put you back on track to learning and improving. At this point, 80% of the challenge was behind us and it was time for the final push. I was still solidly above 1800 rating, but I hadn't really climbed too much for quite a while. It's good to remind yourself of the improvements you have already made, because we honestly had made a ton, and that rating will follow eventually. I decided it was finally time to study some real TVT because I didn't want to be held back in these final 20 games by one matchup that seemed annoying to me. Maybe once I study it and find out some dirty tricks, I would find myself really enjoying the matchup. Who knows? I once again studied some games by light and was quite surprised by what I found. TVT looked like the most cheesy matchup ever. I was expecting solid openers into very long games with a lot of camping. Instead, I found insane double factory rushes, double starport rushes, a lot of crazy gambles like CC first, and more than anything else, a lot of mines, and I mean a lot. Besides this, I studied replays for my weaknesses. I realized that I was quite good at TVZ, but I just misread timings in builds in most of the games. In the TVPs, I would frequently get myself into a really good position, but would then rush myself too much and die. After these very important realizations, I had my best session yet, destroying a 2000 rated Zerg player, a 1900 Zerg and a 1900 Protoss twice, all in very one-sided games. The TVPs were beautiful, I made good tactical movements with my army and overall played smarter and way more patient. The TVZs were mostly very clean, I attacked viciously and macroed well behind the aggression. I even adapted to build Valkyries for the first time ever, which was a very welcome new strategy to my portfolio, helping with my struggles against Mutalisks. After this, I reached an absolutely crazy 1900 rating for the first time, once again destroying my expectations for this challenge. I was even getting somewhat close to A rank, the rank where a lot of seriously strong players are in. After this, I won 3 more TVPs against a 1900 Protoss, succeeding in adapting to situations better, and even winning my first really drawn-out macro game. My main army control was decent for what felt like the first time. Maybe I did secretly grow 3 pairs of extra hands by playing this game after all. My struggles with reading the state of the game did continue. Judging from the replays, I was still consistently wrong about the game state in many different moments, even multiple times in the same game. As I climbed in MMR, TVZ really did start becoming a bit of a nightmare. It felt like a very frustrating matchup to play against strong Zergs, as I just kept losing units to Mutalisks over and over and over. Even though I felt like my defensive position was at least okay. And before I even had a tech unit like Science Vessels, there would be 10 lurkers in my face already. In another TVZ, my opponent had 3 lurkers on his ramp for my 15 Marine push, which for StarCraft 2 standards sounds absolutely ridiculous. I decided to not tilt, take a break and re-evaluate my TVZ and what I could do to win against Zergs for the final 10 games of this challenge. Before starting this final stretch, I decided to study a couple more videos for TVZ inspiration. I ended up finding a pretty crazy build by a Terran called Royal, where he went for double armory mass Goliath. At this point with the skills I had, I felt like playing Bio against Zerg was going to be a bit too difficult. In particular the stage where you have to defend against Mutalisks and then still get damage and map control before lurkers are out. Mech felt like the perfect way out and kind of back to my comfort zone as well. The next couple games were very eventful macro TVPs where I was reminded of a couple weaknesses that I still had. Even though I had felt more comfortable playing the game, navigating the Brood War AI still felt pretty rough. Sometimes I wouldn't manage to get my tanks to siege or unsiege in time. My vultures wouldn't lay mines or my units wouldn't come to reinforce. It also seemed very tough to macro past the 5-6 factory stage. In these couple games against Protoss, I really felt like good strategies should take a strong priority over mind games in Brood War. In one game I pretended to attack while macroing behind it, but playing against a Protoss without dealing early damage just felt like a bad idea, even if the mind game worked. Even to the point where I thought that if I didn't attack a greedy Protoss, the game would be pretty much over by default. On the other hand, attacking early, even if they were prepared for it, still would leave the game in a playable state, making it an easy decision to drop the mind games and stay aggressive no matter what against Protoss. At this point, I felt like I might not be able to climb much more for the remaining games of this challenge, but then I ran into this guy. A 2175 rated Terran. Not just A rank, but high A rank. A game where I would surely get destroyed, especially with my weak TVT. Or did the studying pay off? I decided to go for the double factory Vulture Rush, a strategy close to what I would often use in StarCraft 2. The initial attack seemed to go very well, but sadly I got overexcited and underestimated repair, losing a bit of my momentum in the process. I stayed active and kept vision with my units in front of his base as well as my flying barracks, waiting for an opportunity. I started to get afraid that I had blown my opportunity against such a strong player. Not only a strong player, but he would also give me a ton of points. But then I felt like my time had come. I'm not quite sure how I managed to read the Vulture count because I'm normally not great at judging fights like that, but I went in. I used a very important micro I learned, making sure to target the Vultures and ignore the tank. I won the fight and pushed through with just a handful of Vultures. I managed to kill a very important tank on the ramp, and from that moment on the floodgates were opened. I spilled into the main, able to lay spider mines on top of his production, destroying future tanks, and my opponent surrendered the game. After all our TVT struggles, we had just beaten an almost 2200 rated Terran, and our confidence was fully back on the menu. We had 7 games left to play, and despite that beautiful last win, getting 2000 points in A rank still felt like a faraway dream, but for the first time it actually felt possible. I tried a crazy double factory one base cheese in TVP against a player that I knew liked to play greedy, but it didn't work out. In general, I don't like super committed attacks like that because it often creates a scenario where you have to play too desperately, even moving forward when you can see it's clearly not a good idea. And if it fails even a little bit, you're already screwed. My initial TVP build of this challenge, the 10-10-10, felt like the best mix of aggression and macro. Moving forward in Brood War, it would be great to find more strategies with exactly that level of aggression. After this, I won 2 TVZs, showing that my earlier studying of the new mech build paid off big time. One of these games was against a high-ranked Zerg, establishing my confidence that the build would not just be a simple timing to safely beat weaker players, but a build with real potential. I managed to defend the cheese from the other Zerg, which in its turn confirmed my belief that it would be a good build to use against lower-rated players as well. In the next game, I could tell that my TVT studying also really worked, as I absolutely destroyed a 1950 rated Terran with solid macro play, using Vultures and tanks all over the map as well as Wraiths. I even had prepared some Valkyries in advance for my opponent's Wraith transition, but I didn't even end up needing them, as I smoothly won the game with just my basic unit composition. After this, I played my first S-rank Terran, which was cool, but sadly he absolutely annihilated me with a build I hadn't seen before. He proxied a barracks in the middle of the map, getting his marines out fast to disrupt my build, as well as arriving early with the flying barracks, scouting my build and blocking my units from finishing in the right spot. At this time I realized why I most likely saw Light scout the middle of the map in his TVT videos, not just to check for double proxy barracks, but also to stop annoying builds like this. For the remaining games, solid play is what did the trick for me. I crushed 2 Protoss players with my simple aggressive pushes, barely needing the macro follow-up at all. At this point I really felt like I had perfected my early push execution, from the hotkeying the units and the micro itself to the transition into the macro game. I played 2 more Zergs which both tried to cheese me, but solid adaptations by making bunkers in time when what I saw was suspicious, as well as good micro from my SCVs defended both of these, after which I could kill the Zergs with a simple mech timing. And that was 100 games done. My end rating was 1959, being only 41 points away from A rank, which feels incredible. I had thought I would probably finish around 1700 or so, maybe reaching B rank once, but dropping down. But in the end it went really well and that felt great. I wasn't just happy about my own abilities here, but also about how quickly I could get into the game and how fun it still was. Everyone always makes it sound like you need 20 years and 100,000 games of Brood War to be able to play it, but it really just isn't the case. All you need is a little bit of dedication, a lot of fun, and you can make it happen. Thank you all for watching. Let me know which game you would like to see me do next. Adios.